here's the part of the video where I tell you what it's all about, which is normally just a slightly longer and unnecessary explainer of what you already saw in the title and thumbnail. But I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume, you already get that, so we're just going to press on. And speaking of pressing, press that like button. The first live action appearance of the Hulk came in the form of the television show The Incredible Hulk from 1978. In that era, options were limited in creating something so fantastical. If it was a high-budgeted movie, NBC Universal could have perhaps gone with puppetry mixed with rudimentary animatronics, or perhaps even stop motion. But with 10 episodes in the first season, which was then expanded to 22 in the second, this character was going to receive a ton of green time. I meant to say screen time. No, I didn't. That was an incredible play on words. So the obvious answer to all of this was to hire a smaller guy to play Dr. David Banner. The name was rumored to have been changed from Bruce because Bruce sounded too gay.
Some genius at the network said, "Oh no, Stan, it sounds gay."
Okay. And a much bigger guy to play the Hulk. The dual roles eventually went to Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. Eventually. The original choice for the Hulk was Richard Kiel of Jaws fame. The man in the Bond movies, not the shark. But apparently, after being painted green and in the process of filming the pilot, a kid on set was like, "Nah, this guy's skinny as all heck. Get rid of him." And so they did. I don't know who this kid was or what he was doing on set, but presumably, it being the 70s, he was probably eating and selling cigarettes. So enter Lou Ferrigno, who was a spectacular fit for the era. Now, due to an ear infection as a baby, Lou Ferrigno lost 80% of his hearing and as a result became withdrawn and bullied as a child. So often he'd retreat into comics featuring the likes of Superman and the Hulk. And it was actually his love for the Hulk that got him interested in bodybuilding in the first place. So the transformation from man to tragic monster went thusly. Bill Bixby as David Banner would be pushed to the brink and then snap. White contact lenses were then worn to show that he was past the point of no return. Then we'd get quick edits showing muscles growing and the tearing of clothes, with a then made-up, camera-ready Ferrigno stepping into his role. The process to get him looking like this was quite extensive. First of all, it began with a strict bodybuilding regimen consisting of a very particular diet and steroid use. After all that, the 3.5 hours worth of makeup and appliances were applied. It first involved having his hair pinned back, a rubber forehead and mask applied, then a heavy application of green paint, multiple layers. That was slapped on, with a powder then used to cut through on the shininess, then with the final addition of fake eyebrows and a wig. He was normally in makeup for a total of 10 to 12 hours to maximize the available shooting time, with touch-ups being done during the day. An hour was also allocated to its removal, with a custom green shower even built in his trailer to scrub it all off. 2 assistants were even employed to help Lou Ferrigno for this, because shoots would often extend well past midnight and he'd be very tired. Plus, most bodybuilders, or people I feel, can absolutely not reach, that very center of your back. Maybe you're like, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, good for you, no one cares. Now look, I think it's a fairly accurate depiction overall, especially considering the era and budget. I'm probably going to be saying that a lot during this video, but at the same time, I don't love the wig and eyebrows. Why did they do that? It's very distracting. I don't like it, but at the same time, this whole thing could have been very different. Well, for one, there was the initial casting, and 2, the studio were keen on making him red, seeing as, that's the color associated with anger. But Stan Lee, he put his foot down and was like, "No, Excelsior and whatever, I will not have it." A version of the Red Hulk, of course, did eventually make his comic debut in 2008. And speaking of 2008, and by that I mean 2003, let's talk about Ang Lee's Hulk. Now, the Hulk as a character hadn't appeared in live action, at least in any significant capacity, since the 1990 telly movie The Death of the Incredible Hulk, 13 years earlier, which was a finale to the series that began in 78. There were, of course, numerous attempts to get it off the ground in the 90s. Avi Arad, famous Spider-Man producer and sometimes ruiner, was also looking to produce a Hulk movie. There was a lot of talk of doing this version with a blend of CGI and animatronics, presumably similar to what they did in the first Jurassic Park. Directors came and went, including Joe Johnston, who ended up on the first Captain America movie. J.J. Abrams even assisted on one of the rewrites. But after talk of gamma-irradiated bug men as villains, and the Hulk fighting a school of sharks, and a bunch of other bits and pieces, some of which did resurface, most of this was put in the bin due to concerns about what direction was all of this going? Was it a drama? Was it an action movie? Was it a comedy? Seeing as names like Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler were considered for the role of Bruce Banner.
Don't get the Hulk angry. You won't like him when he's angry.
And in addition to all of this, why should Universal put $100 million into this property? Especially considering that they'd already spent $20 million in development over this time period, barely of any of which has actually surfaced, aside from some very early concept design from Benton Dew, who made some of his work available in 2011 on his personal blog. Eventually, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon's Ang Lee came on board in the early 2000s, and he brought with him the decision to cast then relatively unknown Eric Bana in the lead role. Unknown to outside of Australia, I should specify. He'd already appeared in the Australian gangster film Chopper and had spent years in sketch comedy. Here's him as Australian game show host Glenn Ridge.
Who was England's most prolific anonymous poet?
Here is him as news and current affair reporter Ray Martin.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, welcome to Australia. It's great to be here, Ray.
Here is him as comedic Aussie larrikin Poiter.
Welcome to our house on Poiter. It's a bloody mansion. Let's go inside, take a squiz if anyone's home.
Now, if you're not Australian, or maybe you are, but you're older or younger than me by, say, 3 years either side, this must all sound entirely made up. But I assure you, some to all of this is real, and he's a genuine comedic talent. I wish he'd do more of it. Anyways, forget Eric Bana for a moment, then we'll talk more about Eric Bana, because Billy Crudup was Ang Lee's first choice for the role. This mock-up piece giving us an idea of what he would have looked like. He was attached for a time before dropping out, probably because in this image, the purple pants he's wearing don't match the blue denim torn-off shorts of the Hulk, a massive oversight and reason enough for anybody to quit anything. Although Eric Bana was eventually cast, he didn't do a lot of the physical stunt work, aside from a little bust up with Josh Lucas in human form. And he didn't even get a chance to do any of the mocap. All in all, not much of Eric Bana was really used as the basis for the Hulk. Bodybuilders were brought in to replicate the face and musculature of the character, and once a real-world physical sculpture was decided upon, that was then replicated digitally. A digital skin was then layered over the top of digital muscles, which would give the impression of things shifting and moving underneath the green surface. The skin itself was painted digitally with texture wounds and tiny details to help sell the impression that this was a living, breathing creature. A lot of the movements were also hand animated, with the team using reference footage like socks tearing or a big muscular man jumping, with all the small imperfections in movement being built in for added realism. And when he changes from man to Hulk, the first thing you're going to notice is the shifting and growing of bones, which was then followed by the muscles inflating, his skin going taut, and then settling over his final form. The digital Hulk was lit based on information gathered on set, including using a miniature bust of the Hulk himself. It was also important to add dirt and sweat to the model and have dust kick up as he's moving to really sell that he's in the physical space. And a big part of making the CGI version of the Hulk feel tangible was his interactions with the environment. So whenever possible, glass was actually shattered, walls were blown out, and vehicles and trolley cars were tilted or flipped. An entire housing complex was even destroyed. The $137 million budget was really put to work. It's a pretty remarkable effect overall, despite appearing dated in moments. Well, many moments. But, it was a hard sell making a big green muscular man in the early 2000s who was on screen for so much of the movie. I think, though, why sometimes a bunch of this doesn't work is because Ang Lee insisted on doing a lot of the mocap himself for the action and fight sequences. He also did the facial expressions for some of the more close-up emotional moments. And looking at the reference footage, you can see why this doesn't really work. Yes, he is a terrific director, but his emotion is somewhat lacking. And in addition to that, his physicality clearly doesn't match that of the Hulk. Now, I'm not talking about his size. Obviously, nobody could match that. Don't be an idiot, but more his proportions. He doesn't run or move or grapple like you'd imagine somebody the Hulk's shape would. I think this would have greatly benefited from designing something specifically around Eric Bana and having him do the mocap, or getting, a really big stunt guy. Now, of course, I say this 20 years on with the benefit of hindsight, But if I did have a time machine with enough time machine fuel for one trip, I would go back and visit early 2000s Ang Lee and say, Ang, director Ang Lee, I loved Brokeback Mountain, a truly touching love story and movie you have yet to direct. I guess don't do any of the Hulk mocap. Look, it doesn't really matter. It didn't do super well. People don't seem to like it. I actually watched it recently for Caravan of Garbage, director Ang Lee. I thought it was all right. Don't worry about that, Ang Lee. It's a series on YouTube, which is a platform that doesn't exist yet. Maybe write it down in your Palm Pilot and you can come back to it in the present day. Sorry, the present day to me. I should specify to that because from your perspective, I'm from the future. Anyways, I love Brokeback Mountain. It's really incredible. Interestingly, this version of the Hulk wasn't always to be an entirely CGI creature. In fact, great efforts were initially put into making a full-scale animatronic version with articulated fingers and all. The team were even rigging up a device that would have his muscles inflate and then a shirt rip off, but all this was halted shortly into production. I believe the reason this was scrapped was because you couldn't really replicate at the time the kind of agility they ended up going with. But I would have loved to have seen what the final version of whatever all this is would have looked like. So if you're out there watching this and you are capable of completing this project with a strong emphasis on using the technology of that era, could you just do that so I can look at it and go, oh yeah, that looks alright, I guess. Skip forward 5 years. The character has again been rebooted into what is technically the same version we are still seeing today, despite many a change. For one, as you're probably aware, Edward Norton played the first MCU version of Bruce Banner, and the look of the Hulk in The Incredible Hulk was entirely different. The emphasis this time was on vascularity, and also being greyish green, and also not to be as huge as he was in the previous film. It was thought by Kevin Feige that the Hulk from 2003, who maxed out at 15 feet, he actually starts smaller and then gets bigger as the movie progresses. But anyway, he thought although this is impressive in scale, at the same time it kind of made him feel too disconnected from his humanity, so he was shrunk down to around 9 to 10 feet tall. The thought was also initially to give him a military-style haircut, basically a skin fade on the side and short on top, but it was then thought by director Louis Leterrier giving him longer hair was the way to go, and perhaps something we hadn't seen before. He also wanted him to have 0% body fat, but not like 0% like a bodybuilder would with giant lats, but more like a superhuman, a bit leaner, so you'd believe he could really move about and strike fast. Edward Norton also insisted that he be the one to actually play Hulk, otherwise he didn't see the point in taking on this role. He even shot video reference so the animators could replicate it, which is pretty unusual for an actor to do. Something new was also tried with the facial capture. A phosphorescent makeup could now be applied to a person as opposed to tracking dots, which when captured, coupled with Mova Contour reality technology, allowed the studio to basically record the facial expressions of Norton down to about 1/10 of a millimeter in 3D. That basically meant that all this reference could be then stretched and elongated into Hulk size. It also meant that a lot of the keyframe animation that was used prior as a painstaking split-second facial animation process wouldn't be required as much. And look, it's not my favorite depiction of the Hulk. I don't really like the 0% body fat look, or the tinted green teeth, or the fact that he doesn't really look like Edward Norton at all. But a lot of people were, and still are, well on board for this look. And that's great. I just disagree somewhat with you. Somewhat. It's also, pretty good. Then, after this movie's release, there were rumors in 2010 that Edward Norton was to be replaced in the upcoming Avengers movie, which was then quickly confirmed by Kevin Feige. A statement was released with Feige saying the decision to recast wasn't based on monetary factors, but that it was instead rooted in the need for an actor who embodies the creativity and collaborative spirit of our other talented cast members. Ho ho! A response was quickly issued by Norton's agency stating that Marvel's comments were purposefully misleading and an inappropriate attempt to paint their client in a negative light. Whoa! Don't worry about it though, things have mellowed since then, with Norton mentioning in a 2019 interview that it basically came down to different creative decisions. He was expecting something more along the lines of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight movies, which he said was initially what Marvel said they wanted, but it was in fact not what they wanted. But he also went out of his way to mention that he got along really well with Kevin Feige. So whoa! Two dudes getting along, whoa. Anyways, forget him. He's out! If all of this had have happened post-Avengers 2012, maybe more people would care, but it turns out most don't. So Mark Ruffalo came on board with big leaps and bounds made to improve what had been done in the previous film. A lot of the techniques used were similar, including spraying the actor's face so they look like a dog who bit into a shopping bag full of glow sticks for the facial capture process, but this version went above and beyond in making Hulk have the essence of Mark Ruffalo, which really helped sell it. This time, a 3D model was created of the actor, allowing all the details and creases in his face to be duplicated into the Hulk, even with the addition of his grey hair. A physical mold would also be made of his face, hands, and teeth. They were then scanned into a computer, which meant the end result is basically an exaggerated version of Ruffalo, even down to the teeth. Also, his teeth aren't green like last time, which is good. Weird choice. I feel like I didn't emphasize that enough, but yeah, why did he have green teeth? I don't like that. He was also given body hair, which is a subtle way of making him more realistic, with light bouncing off it and scattering across his skin. He was also given slightly more body fat and a more lumbering ape-like quality. Mark Ruffalo was also able to wear a mocap suit on set so that he could interact with others and the environment. The team was also able to capture some of his facial expressions on set, albeit in a more rudimentary fashion than what was done before. There was also an emphasis on making sure he had more of a human appearance, which was paired up with a more heroic portrayal. Unlike the previous films, where for the most part, but not always, he was running away from tanks and on the back foot. This time around, he was essentially going to be like throwing a grenade in the middle of a battle and hoping that it went well. Statues and a bust of the Hulk were again brought to set for lighting reference. Plus, they also took actor/model Steve Rom, painted him green, and used him as further on-set reference. And like in the previous movie, The Incredible Hulk, and its follow-up, Age of Ultron, Lou Ferrigno was actually brought back to provide additional voice work for the Hulk. So that's fun. Okay, Age of Ultron. Remember that one? We've just about hit that era where you're going to be getting a lot of opinion pieces titled, just FYI, Age of Ultron is actually the best movie of all time. So, look forward to that. Anyways, one of the major differences this time was the fidelity of the facial capture. There was now a camera mounted onto Mark Ruffalo's face, which meant you didn't have to do as much of the facial capture stuff separately. And of course, Andy Serkis. He not only appeared in the film as funny little South African man, but also acted as a motion capture consultant, considering his extensive work in the field. The big Hulk moment though, and as someone who considers Age of Ultron the best movie of all time, just FYI, is his battle with the Hulkbuster. The idea was to essentially show what would happen if the Hulk hulked out. Previs was created for the scene, so when filming on location, Joss Whedon and the team knew exactly what they were looking for. More so than previously, and also after, I guess. All of this was actually shot on location in South Africa for an added sense of realism, aided again by the filming of a massive amount of physical destruction to the street, including explosions, car flips, steam, people going, etc. The Hulk himself was pretty much rebuilt from scratch, though of course they did take a lot of cues from the previous version. Mark Ruffalo was also given a system where he could look at himself on a screen and perform different facial movements, which would then be shown back to him in real time, but as the Hulk, which makes for good figuring out what face I should use in this scene activity. Also, he was initially going to turn grey in his hulking out moment, but that was changed to give people what they were probably expecting. So instead of this, he was given more of a wild-eyed, sweaty, insane look. Next time he showed up was 2 years later in Thor Ragnarok. The biggest challenge in that being that now he would have an increased amount of dialogue, which would mean the structure and movement of his face would have to make allowances for that. One of the biggest challenges, though, was the fight he had to have with Thor, which would be much more complex than their battle in the first Avengers movie. Doing something like this always proves difficult, sometimes more so than having two digital characters. Considering one of them is physically there and the other one just isn't. So a couple of workarounds to this was, there was a series of physical objects that Chris Hemsworth would use to bounce off and hit, as well as a giant Hulk rig coming in at 8.5 feet that he could interact with. And whenever Chris Hemsworth was actually hit by the Hulk, he'd be replaced with a digital double to really, sell that impact. And that's really it, other than, they gave Hulk a haircut. He's got a little haircut. I wonder if Stan Lee's character gave him the little haircut. Now, the character wasn't used as much for his next appearance in Infinity War. He's mostly in Bruce Banner form, and it appears as if they used the same model from Ragnarok for that early fight scene with Thanos. I guess, though, it's worth mentioning that there was to be a scene that was deleted where the merging of Bruce Banner and the Hulk was to happen when he's inside the Hulkbuster suit and he busts out of it at the end of the film, as opposed to the canonical version of how it happened, that being off screen. And that takes us up to Smart Hulk, which presented the challenge of bringing a whole lot more of the Bruce Bannerisms, thank you very much, to the character, which meant more complex facial capture, more detail in the eyes, the pores. He's got glasses, he's got clothing. There's that bit where he rolls up a big old pancake. One of the greatest achievements, according to Endgame's VFX supervisor, Dan DeLue, was to somehow capture not only his lip syncing when he's talking, but also having him chewing a mouthful of breakfast food at the same time. Which is only a little moment, but something like this had never been done before, and it's little moments like this that help sell the realism of the whole scene. Now, a big point of getting a realistic performance out of Mark Ruffalo, or any actor performing in this particular capacity, is also apparently to get the person on set and comfortable. Because look, you're in a dumb suit with a bunch of cameras pointing at you with a camera strapped to your face. So giving an actor someone to talk with, having something to physically touch in front of them, that helps the whole thing feel more natural. So a lot of the things that you see the Hulk interact with in these modern movies, like the tacos in that taco moment, they actually used real on-set tacos. But here's the thing, they had to then replace those tacos because of the proportional difference in hand size. But I can't stress enough, it's good to have taco reference footage for your digital taco. But on the downside, you probably can't eat the tacos because most food on set is made to look fresh and delicious when it is in fact poison. It's pure poison. Have you ever seen behind the scenes of like a Pizza Hut commercial? You'll never eat Pizza Hut again, if you could ever find one. Smart Hulk is also slightly smaller than Avengers 2012 Hulk, though you might not notice that because he doesn't slouch so much. And here's a fun thing, I bloody love a fun thing. They actually resurrected that original Mark Ruffalo Hulk model to reappear when they revisit the Battle of New York in Endgame. Fun stuff, I love a fun thing. Now in terms of what's next for the Hulk, I suspect, though I have no idea what they're actually going to do with it, this interpretation of Smart Hulk is going to swing back the other way. And we're going to get more of a World War/Planet Hulk kind of savage warlord interpretation. And Caesar's Universal is soon to lose the solo rights for the character. That's why he hasn't appeared in his own movie since 2008. I'd imagine we're going to be seeing a lot more of this character. Or at the very least, Disney can actually put his name in a movie again without having to pay a separate movie studio hundreds of millions of dollars. All right, I have a podcast. It's called The Weekly Planet. If you liked this and you're still here, maybe you'll like that. It's on a bunch of different platforms, including its own YouTube channel. And if you do like the stuff that we do here, you can actually head over to bigsandwich.co, which is like our Patreon, where there's a bunch of early videos and exclusive stuff. Thanks so much to Matt for this extensive edit. He really went above and beyond. And I'm going now. I'm probably going to spend a large portion of my time not poring over the DVD extras concerning the character of the Hulk dating all the way back to 1978. In fact, I'm probably never going to look at any of that or this video ever again. But thank you for watching it. I really appreciate it. And goodbye.